Good morning, everyone. Once again,
Good morning, sir.
it's good to be with you on a sunny day. And today we are looking at shares. But before we jump into shares, I will still give some background. I think I did that last semester, but I will still give some background on corporate finance. Did I talk about it?
Yes, sir.
I did, didn't I? Yeah, so every company requires money to carry out its business and to achieve its objectives. And every business needs money. That money is what we refer to as capital. Every business needs money and is usually referred to as capital. Capital is wider than money, but it entails money. And at the basic level, for a small business, the capital could be sourced from the personal funds of the entrepreneur, personal funds. So you want to set up a barbing salon business or a photocopying business, for instance, you could rely on your personal funding. Then you could also rely on gifts. Gifts, particularly for us in Africa, where we are used to dash. We are used to dash. One of my relatives called me recently, this one, this need. I say, it's borrow, it's not dash. The person was not very happy because we are used to what? Dash. So now he said, I will pay the money back. I said, you will pay the money back. So personal funds, gifts. But once the company is incorporated and particularly wants to start doing serious business, then the company may not be able to source for funds alone from personal funds and gifts. Except it's a politician that has stolen a lot of money, or an ex-customs official who has stolen a lot of money, then he can personally fund it. But our assumption here is that the man is just starting out, so let's call it a startup, and you need funding, and you want to enlarge your business, and your personal funds and the gifts you have got from your uncle and your father and your relatives are not enough. You may need to bring in third parties to partner with you. For the company, if you bring in these persons to partner with you, you will have to exchange shares. Shares will be the consideration for the funding that you are obtaining from them. So this is where we now talk about shares. Apart from shares, you may also get your funding from debts. We'll talk about it, particularly when we come to debentures. You would also derive your funding from debts. So for the company, therefore, we have two major sources of capital. We have the debt capital source, and then we have the equity capital source. Then lastly, a company can also fund itself through what they call retained earnings. When a company makes profits, rather than distribute the profits to its shareholders as dividends, it may retain that money and use the money to drive expansion and to drive its business. So shares and debts are usually referred to as the securities of the company. You want to see section 315 of the Investment and Securities Act. You also want to see section 868 of CAMA, section 315 of the ISA, and section 868 of CAMA. So CAMA defines securities to include shares, debentures, debenture stocks, bonds, other than promissory notes, and units under a unit trust scheme. While the Investment and Securities Act has a more elaborate definition, and company securities, it includes debentures, stocks or bonds issued or proposed to be issued by government. Debentures, stocks, shares, bonds or notes issued or proposed to be issued by a body, corporate, and all that. So you want to now raise money to fund the business, and you have two major sources of funding. Like I said, one is debt capital, and the other is what? Equity. When we talk about debt capital, again, you can divide it into securities. When we talk about securities, we are not talking about debentures, or you can you can refer to a whole debt. A debenture is different from debt. We'll talk about it because a debenture is a multiple debt instrument. It's an instrument that you issue to multiple persons. But you could go straight to a bank and borrow 1 million naira, or you could raise that 1 million naira by issuing debentures. The same way you could raise money by the issuance of shares to a large number of persons. And so before they provide this funding in exchange for your shares, the idea is that they would have also done their due diligence to study the company's objects, the articles of association, the accounts of the company, to ascertain that the company is creditworthy. No, not necessarily creditworthy, but the company has sufficient assets to justify the valuation of those shares. So if you call 10 persons and say, give me 10 million naira in exchange for 10 shares in the company, they could give you that money and you give to them shares in your company. Are you with me? Yes. Remember again that when a company is incorporated, it is not mandated to issue out all its shares. It's not compulsory. Under the old KAMA, you were only mandated to issue 25%. And so that left 75% unissued. Under the new KAMA, there is even no such stipulation. And so we could have a company that the share capital of the company could be 1 million naira, and then the company actually doesn't have tangible cash, but now they need cash. And so they could call 10 persons and say, in exchange for this 10 million naira, we are going to give you this amount of shares. So you receive funding, but in exchange for the funding, you will give out something which is shares. You will have to shed your right to control that company with other persons. Because if you don't give out those shares, you will have the unfettered dominion to control the company. But now you have brought in 10 persons to join you. Are you with me? Yes. You have given them a stake in the business. And they have given you something that you crucially need, which is money. So basically, this is how we finance the company. Of course, as we go further, I will explain that shares are given in exchange for money or something other than money, but that is valued in monetary terms. If you have listened to my audios, some of my audios in the past, you would have heard me talk about it. So I could call Mr. Sufi and say, please, you have a lot of experience in the security industry. I'm issuing you shares. You will give us your security expertise in this company. Are you with me so far? Yes. So we have given him 10 million naira worth of shares. But what is given to us in exchange is not money, but his expertise and his connections. I could call Mr. Kolokolo and say, you look like a politician. I don't know if he's a politician. Yes. So you have a lot of connections with APC people and PDP people. So we are giving you shares in exchange for your political connections. We need political connections to drive this business forward. And so we will exchange shares for that. Are you with me? Yes. So we could call Mr. Cyril and say, okay, you are a lawyer. We need legal advice. We need legal services. We cannot pay you in cash, but come and join us. In exchange for what you offer to us, we are giving you shares. So that is at the more advanced level. But at our basic level, we are looking at shares as a source of what? Finance. Are you with me? Are you with me so far? And I'm saying that when a company issues out either these shares or debentures, it is issuing out securities. So the share is what guarantees you that you have a stake in the business. It's an assurance. That's why it's called a security. It's not only companies that issue securities, governments also do that, and that's why the ISA defines the securities to also include government bonds. So in the Bayelsa State government wants to raise money, again, it can go to Access Bank and raise 2 billion naira. It can also decide not to do that but to go to the public and issue out what they call government bonds, or the federal government of Nigeria could go out to the Nigerian Stock Exchange and through that stock exchange issue out government bonds to the public. So in which case the bonds are issued to a large number of persons. It will have a maturity time. It could be 10 years, it could be 25 years, it could be 15 years, as the case may be. Let's continue. Okay, so our focus today, like I said, is equity finance. Another thing I want to point out again is financing a company through shares is usually done by public companies. Financing a company through shares is usually done by public companies, not exclusively so, but usually done by public companies. Even a private company can be financed through the issuance of shares, but it's usually done through the public company. Because number one, the law prohibits, as you know, private companies are prohibited from issuing their securities to the public. You remember that? Yes, section 22. And so if a private company wants to raise funds through the issuance of shares, they can still do that, but it's not as easy as they would have done if they were on the stock market. For a number of these tech companies that have a lot of prospects and a lot of ideas, but they may not necessarily have physical assets, but they have these tech ideas, ideas to solve problems, to design applications for phones and systems and all that. They usually raise their funds through what they call venture capitalists. Venture capitalists. So the founder of Facebook or Google, for example, and they started small, they didn't have much, they were just university students, but they had ideas in their up there and all that. For such people, they did not raise funding by first of all going to the market. Rather, they raised that money, even when their companies were small companies, through what they call a venture capitalist. So a venture capitalist is somebody who has lots of money. They could have a portfolio of an investment portfolio of $2 million, and is looking for startups to invest in. He's looking for startups to invest in. Are you with me? And so you come to him and you sell him this idea that I have this company can do A, B, C, and D, but I need money to drive the business. So the venture capitalist can exchange money in exchange, can provide that money in exchange for what? Shares. So what I'm trying to say, what I'm driving at is that it's not only public companies that raise money through the issuance of shares, but in practice, it is usually public companies that do that, because for the private company, they have issues of liquidity. Number one, who is going to buy the shares if you want to sell? Since you cannot go to the stock exchange, getting a buyer is going to be very, very difficult. But that does not mean that they don't do that. Please, let's just move on. Okay. For small companies, I believe I mentioned that before, but let me reiterate it. For small companies, shares are usually used for the purpose of control. Control. Why I want my shares to be high is not necessarily because I'm looking for more money from the company, but rather shares will entitle me to control. If I have 50% of the company or 51%, definitely I will be a significant shareholder, and I'll be able to exert significant control. So the aim for issuing shares in a small company may not necessarily be for purpose of raising funds, but for purpose of giving somebody control. But when we come over to the public company, the aim is usually for the purpose of fund raising. So we'll look at some of the merits of equity finance, why a company may opt for this option, because the company has two options. You have the debt option, and then you have the equity option. Why would you want to go for the equity option rather than the debt option? So these are some of the things we want to know. If you raise money through debt, if you raise funding through debt, you will have the just a minute, it's not there now. Is it better?
Yes.
Okay. If you raise funding through debt, you will always have the threat of insolvency hanging over your neck. If you don't pay your creditor as at when due, then he can move to liquidate your company. Are you with me? But that is not so for the equity investor. The equity investor bears the risk with you. Why it's called an equity investor is because he bears risk with you. He rises with the company and falls with the company. That is an equity investor. He's a risk bearer. If the company is doing well, then his share price goes high. If the company goes down, his share price goes down. That is why I may ask you in the exam, ordinary shareholders are usually referred to as the best equity investors, advisors. I'll talk about ordinary shareholders soon, but just note that question. So it doesn't have the threat of insolvency hanging over itself. But if you borrow debt, if you borrow money, you fund your company through debt capital, then you will have to pay interest as at when due. Are you with me? Regular interest. If you default, then your company could be liquidated. On the other hand, if it's a company that is being funded by equity investment, you don't have any obligation to pay any interest. Even if the company makes profit, you don't have any obligation to pay dividends to shareholders. You don't have to. So you could call the shareholders and say, this year we made 1 million naira profit, but we are not declaring dividends. We are plowing the money back and we are expanding. So there's flexibility. That's why I say it's a flexible finance source. There's no threat of insolvency, no obligation to distribute earnings, and the company may retain earnings. Let's continue. Okay, so now let's jump quickly. I was just giving us a basic background. Now let's look at shares and some of the learning outcomes. By the end of this class, you should be able to understand properly the nature of shares. Nature of shares, because I may ask you in the exam to explain the nature of shares. You should be able to understand the procedure and regulations that border on the allotment, issue, and transfer of shares. You should be able to understand the procedure and the regulation for altering the share capital. I think we've talked about share capital. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so these are some of the things we are going to look at. Allotment, rights issues, transfer of shares, alteration, and redemption of shares, and all that. Please put off your phones. What is a share? What is a share? One will now try and look at it. Who has that phone? Kindly put it off for us. So, what is a share? We'll try and explain some things about it and also address some misconceptions. When we talk about share, the first thing that comes to your mind is the right to share. Share means share, is it not so? Yeah, so if I say I have a company and I've given you a share in the company, the normal mindset would be that I've given you a right to share in the company. But for us in company law, we already know that the company is separate from its shareholders. It's a separate entity, a legal entity. It has a personality of its own that is separate from the personality of its shareholders. And that is why the shareholders cannot be called upon to bear responsibility for the obligations of the company and vice versa. So the share in the company is not necessarily a right to share in the company's assets, because shareholders don't have a right to the assets of the company. We emphasize that in first semester. What they have is a right to share in the outcomes. In the outcomes from the judicious application of the company's assets. So when you buy a share in the company, if the company has an oil block, and you buy 50% of the shares of that company that has an oil block, you have not bought 50% of the oil block. No, you've not. You have only bought into a bundle of rights, statutory and contractual rights, in relation to that company and in relation to the distribution of outcomes, or what you call the profits that come from the judicious application of that company's capital. So if the company does well, then what comes out from what the company was able to attain, you as a shareholder, you have a right to share in that. Again, the share gives you a right to share in management. To share in management. So we talked about the two organs of the company in first semester. Sir, what are those organs? Number one. Organs of the company. Number one. Sir? Number two. Number two. Somebody should help him quickly. Mr. Kevin. Is that not Kevin? What is his name? Am I right? Yes. I will use the video and video you so that your face will show on YouTube. Yes? No. What is the second organ? Quickly, my daughter. Yes? No. What is the second organ? That's my name-based sister. Yes? Annabelle. No. Members in general meeting. Members in general meeting. So two major organs. There's the board of directors, and then there's the members in general meeting. Not shareholders, so members in general meeting. Are you with me so far? So your share gives you a right to share in management. So when we talk about corporate governance, governing the company, there are two major strands of corporate governance. There's the board of directors, then there's the members in general meeting. When the members meet in that general meeting, the shareholders all have a right to share in governing the company through basically the use of their voting power. Are you with me? Yes. Good. Thirdly, your share entitles you to capital. So it gives you basically three rights. A right to capital, right to profit, right to control, or right to management. So at the basic level, it gives you these three basic rights. Right to capital. So when we talk about capital, we're talking about when the company eventually is dissolved. Because companies cannot endure forever. One day, definitely, they will be dissolved. And so let's assume the members voluntarily decide to liquidate the company. If they do that, then your share will entitle you to share in the capital that is left after you have satisfied creditors and after you have satisfied the government, you've paid taxes, you've cleared your employees, whatsoever thing is left, the shareholder has a right to share in whatsoever thing is left. So that is capital. But at this level, the company is no longer a going concern, but the company is being dissolved. But while the company is a going concern, you don't have a right to capital. Rather, what you have is a right to share in profits when dividends are declared, and two, a right to have a say in management. So these are the three basic rights. Of course, there are a number of others, but these are the three basic rights. So what is a share? It is an intangible property and has been loosely described as a chose in action. It is an intangible property and it has been loosely described as a chose in action. It represents a member's interest in the company's capital. That used to be section 567 of the old CAMA, but it's now I think 868 of the new CAMA. I will correct some of these things later. Again, the share represents a bundle of covenants. It represents a bundle of covenants which includes rights and sometimes liabilities. Okay, so the most comprehensive or most widely accepted definition of the share is that of Powell J in Bolland's Trustee versus Steele. So you can check it up. Because of time, we'll not go through that. But please check up that definition. It's the most comprehensive and widely accepted definition of what a share is. The interest of a shareholder in the company measured by a sum of money for the purpose of liability in the first place and of interest in the second, but also consisting of a series of mutual covenants entered into by all the shareholders inter se in accordance with the law. The contract contained in the Articles of Association is one of the original incidents of the share. A share is not a sum of money, but is an interest measured by a sum of money and made up of various rights contained in the contract, including the right to a sum of money of a more or less amount. So, Olakunle Orojo defined the share as the expression of a proprietary relationship, in that the shareholder is the proportionate owner of the company, but he does not own the company's assets, which belong to the company as a separate and independent legal entity. So, very important to keep on emphasizing that your shareholding does not give you ownership of the company's assets. Your shareholding does not give you ownership. And so even if you are 100% shareholder in a dry cleaning business, you cannot come to the company and tell the secretary, my wife is going for scan. When she comes, give her 20,000. Give us 20,000. That is wrong, because you don't have the right to that. And so one question one will ask himself, we all know about the Land Use Act and how the Land Use Act prohibits the alienation of landed property without the consent of the government. This popular case, Savannah Bank versus what? Versus what? Mr. Sufi, it's like you're not so much with us today like other days. It is well. Savannah Bank versus what, my daughter? Agilo. You did it last year now. You did it in your 4. Okay, so the question we want to ask ourselves is, the Land Use Act provides that if you do any such transfer, then what you have done is null and void. If you don't obtain the consent of the governor, which is true. So here is this company, ABC Nigeria Limited. The company has a landed property. It wants to sell that landed property to Mr. Sufi. But it wants to bypass the consent requirements in the Land Use Act. It doesn't want to go through the whole hurdle of getting the consent of the governor. Can it sell its shares to, what is your name, sir? Nathaniel what? Can the company sell its shares to Mr. Koko? From Mr. Koko to Mr. Sufi. So let's assume the shares are held by this man. The company is owned by this man. In quote, when I mean owned, in quote, he owns 100% of the shares of the company. The company has only one asset, land. The intention is to sell that land to Mr. Sufi. When they sell the land without obtaining the consent of the governor, then they have run afoul of the law. Can he simply transfer his 100% shares to Mr. Sufi, and by so doing, the land has moved to this man? Will this be in violation of the Land Use Act?
So that I become a shareholder of the company.
You become a shareholder of the company, 100% shareholder. The company has only one asset, land. So invariably, it now appears that you now have the land. So
and he will no longer be a shareholder.
He has no business in the company.
It's not possible.
Will it be in violation of the Land Use Act? That is the question. Yes, sir.
Land Use Act?
Yes, Land Use Act says you cannot sell your land without consent of the governor.
Yes, sir.
Now, I don't want the consent of the governor, but I want the land to move from Mr. Okoko to Mr. Sufi. Mr. Okoko doesn't have the land, but he has 100% shares in company ABC Nigeria Limited. That company has only one asset, land. And so by selling all his assets from him to you, as he violated the Land Use Act by moving that land from A to B, that is the question.
No, we're talking of shares.
Okay.
Yes, so we don't need to have the consent of the governor.
Okay.
To sell shares. Mm-hmm. Yes, so the company has sold their shares to me. I am now a shareholder of the company.
Yes.
And because the company doesn't necessarily need to look for the shares, don't have to be money.
Okay.
It could be other assets.
No, let's assume it was money. Let us assume you gave money in buying the shares from this man. You gave him the money. So this land is valued at 1 million naira. Both of you, what you intend to move is the land. That is what you intend to move. He needs 1 million. He's a shareholder in this company that has this land. You are looking for land. You have 1 million. So you give him the 1 million. He doesn't give you land. What he gave you is shares.
Shares.
In a company that has only one asset, land.
Yes.
As if violated the Land Use Act. Yes, my daughter. Answer for us.
My own personal opinion, I think he has not violated the Land Use Act.
Why?
Because when we're talking about the definition of shares, according to Orojo, he said it's not the shareholder is not the owner of the company's assets, but he has a stake. He has an interest in probably the dividends and anything that has to do with decisions making that affects the assets of the
Please take down this case. I want you guys to look up these cases. Bacha, B-A-C-H-A, I think for those of you that have very good eyes. B-A-C-H-A versus Guzda. No, not versus. Bacha F. Guzda versus CIT, an Indian authority. Guzda is G-U-S-D-A-R-O. Bacha F. Guzda or Guzda.
CIT.
Yes, please. It's an Indian authority, 1955, 27 TRO 1SC. I'll send you my slides if you people keep loving me. Keep loving you. See also this case. It's also an Indian case. Hindustan Liver Employees Union. Hindustan Liver Employees Union versus Hindustan Liver Limited. Please write it. Your writing is the way you show me that you love me. It's part of it. Write in the class. Hindustan is like Hindustan. Liver Employees Union versus Hindustan Liver Limited. Let's move on. There's another very important. Yes, this is the most crucial one I want you to see. Short, S-H-O-R-O-T. Short versus Treasury Commissioners. Please look up these cases. Short versus Treasury. Short as in a short man. Treasury Commissioners. It's a very crucial authority. So please look on these cases. I want to now come back again. So they were right. Please look up. Please look up. So even if a company has only one asset, and that asset is a real property, land. In the past, prior to 1837, in England, it was felt that if a company had only one asset, and that asset was real property, then your holding shares in that company will entitle you at least equitably. You have an equitable interest in the land itself. That was what was felt in the past. So the share, we all know, is a personality. That is why it is often interpreted or defined as a chosen action. It is largely viewed as a chosen action, but it's broader than a chosen action because we have a lot of other statutory implications, but at the basic level, you could say it's a chosen action. It's an intangible property that entitles you to a bundle of rights. And so you have shares in a company that has only one asset, which is land, which is real property. So your personality, your intangible asset, which is the share, is now giving you a share in a company that has only one asset, which is real property. And so in the past, it was felt that that share gave to the shareholder some equitable rights over the real property itself. But from 1837 upwards, the distinction became clearer through a plethora of authorities that the share doesn't give to you a stake in the assets of the company, whether it is real property or whatever. The shareholder is not an equitable holder of the company's assets. The company does not hold its assets on trust for the shareholders. Are you with me? Are you with me?
Yes.
The company is not an agent of the shareholders. It doesn't hold its assets on trust for them. The company holds its assets for itself. And so if the only asset the company has is real property, it still does not entitle you to that land. And so if this man is selling his shares, 100% of his shares, to Mr. Sufi, technically speaking, he has not shifted, the land has not moved. Are you with me?
Yes.
Because the company holds the land for itself. What Mr. Sufi now has are interests in the company that has land. And so they don't really need the consent of the governor, technically speaking. And so it was in view of that, for example, that the Petroleum Act now provides. The Petroleum Act provides that if you're going to sell your interest, you have an oil block extended to you, granted to you by the government, and you want to alienate it, you want to transfer it, you require the consent of the Minister of Petroleum. If not, the whole transaction is on your own. And so, envisaging that this man may want to sell his oil block to Mr. Sufi, but knowing that he requires the consent of the governor, he decides to sell his shares. Rather, the Petroleum Act says even if you are selling the shares of a company that has oil block, go and meet the minister for consent. Because if they are not so required, then I could sell my shares in a company that has oil block. The shares could keep moving hands. Are you with me?
Yes.
Without requiring the consent of the governor.
Of the minister.
Of the minister.
So that's a statutory
requirement. Yes, overriding this principle.
Yes, sir.
As far as the oil industry is concerned.
Yes, sir.
Can we continue? Yes. Are there questions, please? Let's take them.
Which means this is not applicable to others.
No, generally no. Except there's a statutory override. The idea is that once you have shares in a company, no matter the assets of that company, if you are selling the shares of that company, you are not selling the asset. What is sold as shares, yes, the interest. Because the company owns his asset. Because if this man has shares in this company, and as he sells the shares, we say he has sold the land, we are invariably saying that share ownership is equivalent to land holding. Are you with me?
Yes.
And that is what company law is trying to disabuse our mind from, by saying that shareholding is not equivalent to property ownership. Even if the company has 1 billion naira, that you have shares in the company doesn't entitle you to that money. So please look at the case of Short versus the Treasury Commissioners. Please look it up. Maybe we may discuss it tomorrow briefly. And you will see how it played out in that case. The British government was acquiring, in a sense, they were expropriating the shares of the company. Wow. Buying all the shares of the company. Now they had two ways of valuing the company. Two ways. Are you with me? If they had, okay, Mr. Sufi owns 100% of the shares of this company. The British government wants to acquire that company. They could pay him they could use two ways of valuing how to pay him. They could buy his shares, or they could value the assets of the company and pay him. If they value the assets of the company and pay him, they will have to pay him 100 million naira. But if they buy his shares from the company, his shares in the company, they will have to pay him 70 million. Are you with me?
Yes, sir.
And so they opted for the lower and paid him 70 million. And he said, no. Since I own 100% of the shares in this company, are you with me?
Yes.
And the value of this company is 100 million. Then what you should pay me is 100 million. What he is arguing is that my shareholding is equivalent to the value of the company, the tangible assets. of the company. And the argument that the British government used was that no, shareholding is not equivalent to ownership of the assets of the company. And so they had the leverage, they had the option of paying him based on the valuation of the shares of the company.
Because 30% shares are not allotted.
No, everything had already been allotted in this case. 100% allotment. Let me explain something. Particularly when you come to the stock exchange, the value of your shares may be valued based on people's perception. I think I've talked about that before. Have I? Yeah, perception. So I perceive that Dangote is going to do well in the next 2 years. It's a perception. Based on that perception, the market could value Dangote's shares to be 120 naira per share. I perceive that, for example, for the past 5-10 years, there has been this talk about what you call the new move for energy companies, sources of energy, climate change, and fossil fuels. There has been what I would call the demonization of fossil fuels, petroleum, coal, natural gas, not good for the environment, climate change, and all that talk. And so we need cleaner sources of energy. And so a number of these super major oil companies are beginning to divest from their stake in fossil fuels in order to invest in cleaner energy, what they call renewables. Like example of a renewable. You were my petroleum student, you. Eh? No, that black man there. The one wearing green. Bekowe. Example of a renewable source of energy. Wind, solar. Excellent. And these other sources of energy are felt nuclear. They are felt to be safer, cleaner, more environmental friendly and all that. While the fossil fuel is accused of the whole climate change business and all that. Are you with me so far? Are you with me so far? And so there's a lot of divestment going on. And so Chevron is quoted on the US stock exchange. Based on this perception, the value of the shares of Chevron can begin to diminish. Yes. Because the world is moved by perception. The world, that is why it's good to find your life on Jesus Christ. Because everything in the world is fake. I can just say that this girl's hair is a beautiful hair. And everybody will start to do their hair like that. Is it what happens? Yes, sir. It's not real. It's not real. And so, there's one girl that did BB. Oh, is that thing they call BB Niger? Yes, one by Esa girl. Nengi. Good. Now that girl has become a star for a lot of you. Is a model for a number of you. Am I right? Okay, not all of them. But let us assume that she has become your model. I'm saying I'm assuming. The way she dresses will not be the way everybody is dressing. It's a perception. And so there's this perception that these super majors, these major oil companies that we've always known, their valuation is likely to drop because as long as they focus on fossil fuel and the world is moving away from fossil fuel, in quotes, then they will not be very profitable in the future. That perception can, like I said, cause the value of their shares to dwindle. And so what happened in the case of short is that kind of thing. The government has two options. You can have assets worth 1 billion naira on ground, but the market has valued your company for something less, 500 million. That is the truth. That is the truth. You can have assets worth just 10 million naira, and the market can value your asset for 500 billion. So it goes up and down. How many of us have heard about Bitcoin? Mr. Sufi, have you heard of Bitcoin?
Yes, sir. God saved me. I didn't invest. As I was just about to invest.
Yes.
My son who invested,
Yeah.
said, in fact, they returned my money. I was very, very lucky.
So now, for example, there's a man called Elon Musk. How many of us know about him? And some of you are beginning to read, which is good. Now, Elon Musk is a global figure, and he moves the global stock market based on his tweets. So people look at what he writes on Twitter, and the value of the price of some of these commodities can go high or low. And so he gave a tweet about 1 month ago on Bitcoin. That was all he did. He just wrote something on Bitcoin. And then the value began to go high. The value has been going high. Yes, it has been ascending. You bought too? Okay, yeah. So it's that kind of thing we're talking about. So that's what happened in short versus treasury and commissioner. So the whole idea is that the court held that even if this company is worth 100 million naira, the government has the option to buy it 50 million based on the valuation, because your shareholding is not equivalent to ownership of the company itself. I hope I've driven that point and I've overflowed this. Look at these authorities I may ask you in the exam. Okay. We're almost done. We just have 10 minutes more. Okay, so let's just touch briefly on some characteristics of shares and see where we can stop. Tomorrow we'll jump fully into Kama and look at the provisions of Kama in relation to the shares. So basically shares are transferable. In the past, shares used to be, before I go, you video them at least once. Let us see them. Yeah, you can turn it. In the past, particularly under the old Kama, are you with me?
Yes.
Under the old Kama, private companies must restrict transfer, but Kama 2020 has now done away with that by providing that a private company may restrict its transfer. So generally, a share is a transferable security. That is one thing I want to point out. Again, shares can be cancelled. We talked about that again when we looked at reduction of the share capital. You can cancel shares. Shares can be forfeited. Shares can even be issued in fractions. Shares can be issued in fractions. We'll talk about fractional shares briefly. Please see section 187 and 432 of Kama 2020. Again, by default, stop disturbing. By default, shares are equal. By default, shares are equal. What they call equality of shares. By default, all the shares in a company are equal. By default, all the shares in a company are equal. So I think we'll stop here. But before we go, let me just, since we just have more time, let's just touch briefly about the preference share and the ordinary share. I think we can use 9 minutes and explain that and save time. Okay, so not every share, like I said when I talk about equity finance, I talked about two major sources of financing, debt and equity. I did not say debt and shares, because all shares are not equitable. All shares do not constitute what you call equity finance. Not all shares can be said to be equity finance. An equity finance is the issuance of shares to an investor who bears risk with you, who bears the risk of the company rising and falling. And secondly, it has no limits. It has no limits on the extent to which he can participate in the profitability of that company. So if the company makes hyper profits, the equity investor also has hyper profits. There's no cap on the extent to which he can benefit if the company does well. There's also no net, no safety net for him if the company is going down. And we said that the ordinary shareholder is the most original form, the most genuine form of equity investment. So when you issue shares in exchange for funds, by default, those shares you are issuing out are said to be ordinary what? Shares. So the ordinary shareholder has a right to be involved in the management of the company. He has a right to also make profit when the company does make profit. But sometimes a company may decide to raise funds by the issuance of what I may call a hybrid between debt and equity, and that is what we may call the preference share. The preference share is sandwiched in between the debt capital and the equity capital. So what is a preference share? Is a share issued in exchange for money that gives to the holder a preferred right to dividends. A preferred right to dividends. It is not a debt, because the holder of the equity of the preference share cannot move to liquidate the company. Are you with me?
Yes.
And so the company issues shares, preference shares to this man, and says every year as we make profits, we are going to give you this amount of money as dividends. So the dividends are predetermined, they are fixed. You have agreed that you'll be giving him every year. If you just assume he gives you 100 naira, every year you'll be giving him 10% of that money, which is 10 naira, as dividends. So it's a fixed amount. For the equity investor, it's not fixed. I give you 100 naira, go and trade. If you make profit and you declare, because the company can make profit and still not declare profit. Are you with me? Yes. Sorry, you declare profit, but you not declare dividends. So we have made profit this year. Shareholders, please, sorry, there's nothing we can do. We want to expand our business. You have to just bear with us. Just have to bear with us. So this year, no dividends. Next year, no dividends. The other year, no dividends. We are expanding. A time will come when all of us will smile. But for now, please bear with us. Let's keep expanding. That is the equity investor. He has to bear with them. It is only if he can now allege that the non-declaration of dividends is done in malice, with an intention to oppress him as a minority shareholder, then he can seek relief under what we call the just and equitable minority protection rule. We'll look at that when we come to minority protection. But apart from that, the equity investor has to bear with the company. But for the preference shareholder, once the shares are issued to him, he holds those shares. At the end of the year, he's expecting his 10 naira as what? Dividends. And so if you make profit, you must give him his dividend. If you don't give him, he can go to court. If you don't make profit that year, then the money will be accruable. That's what they call cumulative preference shares. So preference shares are cumulative. The dividends is cumulative. Are you with me? Yes. So this year you were to give him 10 naira, there was no profit. So there's nothing he can do. He has to bear with you. But next year you now make profit, you pay him the 10 naira for last year plus the 10 naira for this year. For the creditor, on the other hand, you have taken 100 naira from him, and you have told him you will give him 10 naira at the end of the year. At the end of the year, if you tell him you did not make profit, he can enter your property and seize your bag. The preference shareholder cannot enter and seize your bag, but the money will be accruable. The money will keep accruing. Are you with me? Yes. So these are the three. There are other hybrids, but maybe we may touch on one or two of them. But at the basic level, these are three instruments I want you to know. So there's the preference share, and then there's the ordinary share, and then there's the debt instrument. Now there's a fourth kind of share, which is also an equity share. It is called a founder's share. A founder's share, or it could be roughly referred to as the deferred share. Founder's share or the deferred share. It is an equity share also. Why is it an equity share? Because again, the holder of this share, he rises and he falls with the company. He rises and he falls with the company. Are you with me so far?
Yes.
What happens in the deferred share is that there is a deferred right to dividend. Remember, for the preference share, there is a preferred right. Are you with me?
Yes.
Preferred, me first. Deferred, me last. So we are deferring your right to dividend. Usually what happens is that the deferred shareholder may not be paid any dividends until the company is being wound up. Until the company is being wound up. It may not be paid any dividends. So it is usually held by founders. I have set up this company and I believe the company is going to do well. I need other people to join me. But I'm reserving for myself control rights. So as a deferred shareholder, I may reserve for myself more control rights than the rest of you. I may reserve for myself special rights. For example, I may reserve the right to appoint the managing director and then the chief financial officer. But as far as dividends are concerned, I'm deferring my rights to the future. And so if the company is going down, definitely I will go down because I'm not entitled to dividends while the company is a going concern. So these are some instruments I just want us to be aware of. Tomorrow we'll jump in fully into the Companies and Allied Matters Act, and if we meet twice, we should be able to wrap up shares, and then God helping us, we jump into the debentures. So one or two questions before I go. I have the meeting by 12. Okay, no question. Is the attendance, have you all signed?
Yes.
Excellent. So thank you very much for your time. God bless you all.